welcome to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. And coming up, we've got part one of a two-part podcast with Scott Aggett, who is a buyer's agent, a negotiation expert, an ex-sales agent. And I quizzed him on a Facebook post that he put up with quite an inflammatory title, which was "The traditional buyer's agent model in Australia is flawed, and this is why." So we get him to unpack that and what his beliefs are around the buyer's agent model and what's the problem with it. Of course, Scott is a buyer's agent, so he does have a horse in the race, but I think this is an interesting debate, and there's something in it for all consumers. If you are considering using a buyer's agent, there's some tips and ideas to challenge the buyer's agents around their model and questions to ask them to make sure you're getting the best possible result. So we've split this into two parts. Here's part one. Scott Aggett, thanks for joining me back on Geared for Growth.
Good morning, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. And, you know, you're a person that I'm always happy to have on the show, always learn something when I catch up with you. But the focus for this one really was sort of generated from what I would consider quite an inflammatory post made on Facebook with the title, "The traditional buyer's agent model in Australia is flawed. This is why." And there was some meat on the bones there. You went into 6 different individual points, but I think when I think about my part to play in the greater property investment space as someone with a podcast and co-host on another one, on the board of Pippa and those sorts of things, I always try and get righted back on thinking about the consumer. What happens to the consumer? Where are they at risk? You know, where are the wolves hiding in the woods that can damage them? And I think there's some parallels with that post. But what was the key motivation for you in throwing that out into the world?
Just from experience, Mike, first of all, thank you for having me back on the show. It's always a pleasure to come back and have a chat with you. And I love having a chat with you because you're incredibly balanced with your view of all these different takes in the industry. So it's always a good, healthy debate in either direction. But I think, mate, it's based on my experience in the industry over a very long period. And I feel like I'm in an educated position that I'm afforded an opinion based on sitting on both sides of that fence, right? Like actively being an agent, selling to buyers agents previously in my day job then, and then changing teams and working on the buyer side to represent them and seeing the challenges that they go through and hearing the different war stories and things that come out from within the industry. Not a lot of it is spoken about, Mike, and I just feel like it's one of those large topics that should be addressed. It should be transparent. It should be broken down and discussed. And unfortunately, sometimes you've got to go out with a big headline or a big swing to actually garner attention. And it wasn't necessarily to bring attention to me, it's to highlight the issue and to have some healthy debate around it. And it's been interesting to see what the feedback has been since then. So I welcome unpacking that with you and you harpooning me from the position of power that you hold in the industry.
From a position of power I've created for myself. I think people will probably understand that I'm an advocate of buyers agents. I think the best ones that are probably in rarefied air in the country are worth their money times a factor of many. But we are in a situation where the pool of buyers agents is rapidly expanding, and being inside the industry and seeing some of the transactions and speaking to people within the industry, I agree that there's a big problem with the regulation, with the qualifications, with the experience required to get in the mix. But starting off with your first point, you basically said it's too expensive, typically starting at $15K, raising as high as 4% of the total purchase price. Now, my argument would be, okay, let's say it's $15,000 or $20,000. If you're getting someone to have a look at, say, your portfolio, how the next property fits in there, doing analysis, talking to you about your goals, doing the due diligence and negotiating in a situation where you could save actually more than the cost, then that's not too expensive, surely.
Yes, true. I agree. But I think fundamentally there's some key areas within what you just said that if you break those down, there's a issue there with value for money. I've got a business that can do it for substantially less money and still make a profit. So I think there's a lot of fat inbuilt into that process where people are overpaying for that skill. The last bit you said around negotiating, that value back and potentially saving that money, where's the accountability and the transparency around who saves what money and the quality of the negotiation that goes into it? So I would question that element of it as well. But yes, in essence, there's a lot of work that goes into it. A good buyer's agent that's going to add a lot of value to that process will be worthy of a reasonable professional fee. I just think for the entry-level buyer's agent, because we're not talking about, I think it's important to talk about this up front as well. We're not talking about the top, say, 5 or 10% of people in the industry, because this isn't about them. There's plenty of people doing good things, and I said that in the comments as well. There's lots of good people doing good things in the industry. It's about the wave of new entrants into this market. And a lot of the businesses that have built really what I would call the Instagram buyer's agent model, they're heavy on the marketing, less so on the customer service on the back end, and less so on the transparency and accountability. So they're the ones that I want to break down and get an understanding of where is the value for money and, where is the transparency in that service for the consumer.
Because there's no independent auditor that says, well, quite reasonably, you could have got it for this. Yes, you got a $10,000 saving, but you paid more. You're always kind of really in the dark about, well, where could that have gone? And every now and then you hear insights from agents talking about buyers agents, basically saying, this person just overpaid. The owner was quite happy to give it away at X, but we know for a fact that buyer's agent didn't have the negotiation skills or didn't have the care factor to negotiate in that way. And that it kind of points to incentives to me, and it's not particular to the buyer's agent industry. There are incentives in all sorts of services, and the incentive to negotiate a strong deal at the risk of the deal itself, where you're actually getting paid, it's not sufficiently there. Of course, we would love people to just understand their responsibility to the client and the client's expectation that they will negotiate hard, but the incentive to do that doesn't seem to make sense to me when it's risking the sale, which could be the only way that you're actually going to get paid for doing the work, right?
Yeah, 100%. So it's the same as on the sales agent side, where there's a misalignment there in terms of pushing for that last $10,000 or $20,000 when they're charging a flat fee, which is the average of 2% of a sales fee in Australia. So that's the same. It needs to be a performance-driven sliding scale where they've got skin in the game, where they're motivated to overachieve and less motivated to do those quick sales just to turn over property and become a volume-based agent. But there's a lot of that problem in the selling side of the property transaction. But on the buy side, like, you put yourself in a situation where you're representing a buyer as a buyer's agent. Typically, they might charge $2,000 or $3,000. Some are even doing it for free in terms of the upfront engagement that we've been hearing about in the industry. But then back-ended charging 2% or 3% or $15,000 or whatever is the sort of second payment once that contract is signed. Well, what's the motivation, Mike, for you in that situation where you're going to earn $0 or $2,000 or $3,000 hypothetically, or $15,000, $20,000, $30,000? It's going to be to get the deal done at whatever cost you can. And that's where I've got a real issue with it, because there's people just putting deals together just to ensure they get paid. There's not really a fight then to ensure that the client, the consumer that you're representing professionally and you're taking a huge fee for, is actually getting the best outcome. Now, I'll give you a live example of this. We had a client ring me yesterday that I haven't spoken to for 2 years. I've never done business with them before. They had a property going to a boardroom auction in Melbourne last night. Rang me up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday and said, we're incredibly emotionally invested in this process. We want to outsource it to you as our negotiator. I know there's no real negotiation you can do here because they've already met what is effectively the reserve price, and it's just going to sell for whatever it sells for in a boardroom auction, and there'll be 3 of you in total competing for it. Now, I said to him, well, the first thing we will always do is run very detailed analysis, because I want to know what the right number is, because I don't want you competing for this property if you're already going to be overpaying for it, if there's better options out there, or at least want to educate you about what the real value of that property is. Now, it's so easy in that situation, Mike, for me to say, okay, well, you think it's worth 1.1, Mike. Here's a load of comparable sales evidence that thinks it's worth 1.2. So therefore you should be spending 1.2. I could easily talk you into paying an overinflated price to put you in a position where you're emotionally invested and you get the deal done and I get paid. Not only do I get paid even more, because the more you spend, the more I get paid. It's just completely misaligned. So I've got a problem with that. And I think there's no accountability in terms of the accuracy of the data, and there's no transparency around those results. So yeah, that's where I want to unpick it and really push hard.
Yeah, and even in that situation, there's an opportunity where the client becomes a raving fan. They're like, "Oh, you worked with, Scott, got me the property that I wanted. It was competition, but we out negotiated them." When the reality could have been you just paid more money. But there's no way for them to understand. They could literally be writing a positive review on someone that hasn't advocated for them in the way that we would expect as a consumer, right?
Yeah, well, I had a buyer's agent in Melbourne who, and I'm not just harping on Melbourne here because I'm not even from Melbourne, but there's just these two references are. I had a buyer's agent that was reasonably new into the industry. They've got a very glossy, beautiful website full of 5-star testimonials from past clients or current clients they're working with. But they're paying me to negotiate their deals as the expert negotiator. So they're bringing clients on the proviso of whatever they're charging them, $10, $12, $15,000, but then paying a portion of that money to my office to negotiate those outcomes. And now the thing that scared the hell, that's obviously a giant red flag for me. A professional person that's outsourcing part of that role because they don't know how to do it or they don't perceive they can do it as well as us is issue number one. But what really scared the hell out of me, Mike, is that buyer's agent told me, I don't need your help for investors. I only need your help for owner occupiers. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Let's unpack that. Why? She said, investors are easy to negotiate for because I only just have to show them the price and the return, and then they'll pay that number. Versus owner occupiers, they're all emotional, and you've got to try and negotiate them an outcome to suit them. I'm like, but they're exactly the same thing. You analyze accurately and you negotiate really hard. How do you even have that mindset that you're in control of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for your client, and you have a view that you don't have to negotiate for investors and you've got no clue how to negotiate for owner occupiers? Like fundamentally, that system is broken, that person is in control of someone else's money. And I just don't understand how that works in Australia. And I think that's what needs to be highlighted and broken down.
I think that's a pretty disgusting example of someone acting as a buyer's agent, to be honest. And I'll read out what was point 2 because that's really what we're talking about in this post of yours. You said, with a vast wave of new buyers agents entering the industry, most don't have a clue how to negotiate and have had very little property experience in their lifetime. Having not sit in the agent chair, they have no idea what games are being played in real time, and it's a learnt skill. They're practicing with your money. And you said, you've got some buyers agents paying me to negotiate. When I first heard that, probably maybe a year ago when we were chatting, I thought two things. I thought, well, good on that person for being humble enough to understand that you're a better expert in that space, because I mean that's what I see as your niche. You're an expert in the art of the deal and the negotiation sort of stuff. But then I also kind of thought, well, geez, if you can't do it at all, or maybe it's just a mentoring thing where they're upskilling them as close as they can to get your level, that's okay. But if you can't do it at all, it is a fundamental skill set of a buyer's agent, in my view, that probably shouldn't be outsourced. Where do you stand on number one, that it's actually a good thing that they recognize that the best for the client is X, but they're sort of taking a clip of the ticket of that to some degree, aren't they? The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Yeah, I think you're drawing a pretty long bow as well to find a silver lining in that part of it, personally. I mean, I think that's and you're a very positive person, and I agree with you that that's a good thing that they're outsourcing that, or they're putting their hand up to say that they're not equipped to handle that. But there's just no way that person should be in the industry. There's no way that a person should own a company or even be working within a business unless they're being educated under an experienced person that's licensed and has got that capacity to coach them into those situations. But the point about me saying, they don't understand the agent game plans that are happening in real time against them, and they're, using your money to practice it is very much a learned skill. So even when I, as an expert negotiator, have built a business around other negotiation experts that come in my team, I'm constantly training them, constantly breaking down case studies on a daily basis with our team But these are experienced people, Mike, that have been in the industry for typically 10 years plus, and they're buying 10 to 15 properties a month for us across the country. They've got huge amounts of runs on the board, and they understand the buying process from the inside out. It is very much a learnt skill. So is analysis. And really, those two things go hand in hand, and they're married together, and they have a big impact on moving the needle in the buying journey. You can't fundamentally learn the art of negotiation unless you've just sat there in that chair and practiced and practiced and practiced. And I've done circa 4,000 transactions, but I've probably missed another 4,000 or 5,000, over that time that you go through that learning curve. And the other big part about it is if you haven't sat in the agent chair, that gives you a really unique insight into how the nuts and bolts of a process of a deal unfolds, because you've got to understand what the agent is doing in terms of balancing other buyer interests that's competing against you, their vendors' expectations, and their role to manipulate that situation to get an emotional premium and get a result done. So there's a whole heap of stuff that you need to be able to put yourself in the mind of the agent when you're a negotiator working for a buyer to say, okay, Mike, I know, hypothetically, and this is all just, in my mind, I'm not saying it out loud, but it's, okay, Mike, I know what you've got to do in this situation. You've got to go back to your vendor here. You've got to give them all the reasons why they should accept my offer. You've got to also go back and use that as leverage against all the other buyers that you're competing against. So how am I going to change my dialogue? What cards can I use? What lines can I throw that are going to give me a higher percentage chance to win it based on the data points that I've got from the agent by asking all the right leading questions? Someone that doesn't know all of that, they're just lost in the weeds. They're just ringing up and saying, oh, hello, yep, I like 12 Smith Street. Oh, yeah, great, it's on for 730. I'd like to pay 720. That's not negotiation. They haven't got a clue what they're doing in that situation. So, I just don't know how you get that level of expertise unless you've sat on the other side of the fence, or unless you've been coached incredibly well. But that coaching would take years to really understand the nuances of negotiation. So I think anyone that says it's just as simple as, registering for the buyer's agent, industry and going through a 12 points of CBD training every year is never going to catch up to someone that's got those negotiation skills either.
And your points 3 and 4, there's no transparency or accountability on the accuracy of the advice, and it's not financially aligned to the end result. So there's no incentive to negotiate hard to save money. And in your example of the owner-occ versus the investor, I mean, just because, it looks good on paper and the returns are okay, and to them it's kind of worth that, doesn't mean they should be throwing away their hard-earned. I've always thought it quite curious, the idea that we have around money when we're looking at an asset like a house. We might say, oh, okay, we'll give you another 10 or 15 grand. If that was money coming out of your wallet or, out of your bank account, you might be much more hesitant to hand that over. But when it's all just part of, the bank's giving me a loan, to me, it sort of seems a bit like people going into the casino and they've got $100 they want to spend, and they're quite happy to lose for a night's entertainment. But very early on, they get up to $200, but they're like, that's all upside. So, I may as well keep going. Well, no, technically that could be $200 in your pocket. You need to consider it that way. There's something wrong when we talk about those big sums and people's willingness to just chuck it away, right? And I think that's where those predatory kind of people that don't care about the negotiation are thriving.
Yeah, or maybe it's inbuilt in our psyche as Australians. Like non-stop, if you turn any TV channel on, you get sports bets, sport betting ads thrown at your face non-stop. We're a history, or a country, I should say, of gamblers. I'm not personally. I hate gambling, but it is inbuilt into a lot of what we do in this country. So maybe there's a rolling the dice part of it that is human nature for Australians that it isn't in other countries. But yeah, I mean, it's very easy to manipulate the data. It was easy to manipulate the data when I was a selling agent, and it's easy to do it on the buyer side. It's probably even easier to do it on the buyer side because the customer that's paying you trusts you impeccably that you're doing the right thing for them. So if you move the numbers around and find comparable sales to suit your narrative, it'd be quite easy for me to convince you, Mike, that you need to pay a higher price. And then it's very easy to negotiate a $50,000 saving, as you referenced before, and then say, well, great, we bought it $50,000 under market value, 5-star review, and what a tremendous job I did. But in the meantime, you've overpaid by 50 grand.
Mm.
Yeah. And then when I talk to real estate agents constantly, right, like we live and breathe this 7 days a week, and often agents will say things that are quite crazy to hear, and now it's just part of the norm for me. But I had a conversation late 2023 in Manly in Sydney with one of the leading agents in Sydney. We were having a chat about my business model and talking about the market in general. And he said, it's really interesting that you're doing what you're doing in the industry, because we constantly are selling at the premium end to buyers agents. And I would say that 8 out of the top 10 nosebleed sales in Manly and surrounds in the last 12 months leading up to that point were buyers agents massively overpaying. Yeah, 8 out of 10. So it's that the agents are conscious of it as well. So they lick their lips when they see a buyer's agent come through. And that's something that I didn't go into. I could have put a 0.7 there on that blog post, and I deliberately didn't to get into the murky waters. But cohesion is a big one that I feel like is something that needs to be discussed. You mentioned off air, a little bit of industry review potentially that might take place in the future. Well, that would be one of the points that I'd want to get into, because I'll give you an example of this. I deal with a conveyancer or solicitor in Sydney. They acted for me over 20 years personally, and I did a lot of business through them with my Bell Property franchises in the eastern suburbs. Now, last year I had a long conversation with him about buyer's agents, and he said the system is fundamentally broken from his perspective as one of the top lawyers in the country on property lawyers. That when he goes to settlement and prepares the settlement figures, he gets X amount, the agent gets X amount, and the highest person paid in the room at settlement is the buyer's agent. So he's been on transactions where the buyer's agent has shown one person through the door and they're collecting a $700,000, $800,000 check out of the transaction. Now, there's just no world that I live in that you could justify the amount of work that is worth a paycheck like that for the simple process of running a buyer through the door. Other people may argue with me, and they set the price and people are prepared to pay it. Then that's, I guess, market value for that service, and good luck to them if they've got a business that works like that. But I just think that model's flawed. It's just way too much for the work they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a commission check that could reasonably dictate 2 or 3 years worth of full-time work if they were working in any other industry. And I think often the issue is with some of the new buyers agents is they don't have a tremendous amount of credentials. They don't necessarily have university degrees, and maybe if they do, it's in a completely different field, because there's been a lot of people attracted into this space because it seems like a great way to make money. And I've spoken to accountants that have quite a few buyers agents on the books, and the net profit margin, I have to say, I'm green with envy. If we could do that, I probably would be in the Bahamas right now.
Yeah, I'm the same. So we made a conscious effort to make it an affordable service and to really try and do something that's transformational in this space, but it comes at the cost of profit, right? Like we could be much more profitable if we charge the prices that other BAs are doing. And I would argue that we should be charging the most, because we're bringing the highest level of integrity and industry experience to the table, but we're charging the least amount of money. So there's an opportunity for us to build a big business or a volume-based business, but it's also fundamentally a problem I think needs to be addressed from the top down, from the other side, that they're charging a lot of money for a service that needs to be questioned.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because nice guys maybe finish last in this equation. I mean, I know with our business, we could certainly be more profitable by spending less time on the end product. But at the end of the day, there's a bare minimum that we think has to be spent to give a quality product. And, there is a bit of a race to the bottom in some of the services and some of the verticals that we operate in. But our decision is kind of like, well, we would rather do something else, something where we are adding value. So
I'm the same. It becomes very transactional, doesn't it? If you just focused on the profit side of it. And that's a concern for me that, in the marketing to bring new buyers agents in the industry, it's a lot around how much money you can earn. Nothing really that I see in the media or social media space around the impact you can have positively on someone's life or the journey that they're going through by representing them and doing a great job like you or I do. It's more about how much money you can make. And I think that's where it's flawed, right? It's just about profit, and it becomes very transactional. and you bring people or attract people in the industry that are just after the cash.
Well, Scott, thanks for sharing those insights with me today. I'm keen to unpack the rest of the points that you've shared in this post. So we look forward to sharing that one next week when we look at part 2 of the buyer's agency model and why you think it's flawed.